provides a practical, cost-effective approach to assess emergency management program capabilities. The panelists will share how they applied the process to review their capabilities and utilize those results to make realistic management decisions and enhancements within fiscally constrained budgets. You should have received the training reminder that included the link to the presentation resources for today. They are the 2010 Emergency Management Standard by EMAP, the 2011 Emergency Management Candidates Guide to Accreditation, and the presentation panelist bios and the participant manual, and there was also a link to the EMAP website. You can also access the materials on the dashboard on the right-hand side of your computer under the materials portion. If you have problems accessing the materials, please let me know and we will forward them to you following the completion of the presentation. Before we get started, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the dashboard on your screen so that if you have any comments and or questions, you can provide them to me. Everyone will be muted as we go through the presentation until you raise your hand, and then I will unmute you in order to for you to ask your questions. Please feel free to ask questions as we proceed through the presentation, as there is no need to wait until the end of the presentation. If no one has any questions at this point, we will proceed with the presentation. And I'm just going to double check and make sure that everybody is on board and we're moving forward and that nobody has any questions before I mute you.
Actually, one comment. I was not able to sign on line, and so I am dialing in by phone. So
okay.
As the presenters, if they can point out where they are in their presentation, I'll follow along.
Okay. You do have the participant manual?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, the panelists will actually ask me to change to the next slide, so you should be aware of kind of where we are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
No worries. Okay, so the slide we're going to start off with is the welcome and introductions piece. And you can, for those of you that are following along in that manner, and again, I'm going to go ahead and mute you at this point. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to double check. Thank you. First, I'd like to introduce myself as I will be your facilitator for the presentation. My name is Christine Jacobs, and I'm the projects coordinator at EMAP. I'm responsible for development and design of projects that are outside the normal realm of the EMAP assessments and accreditation process. I mainly work with the stakeholders to develop pilot projects for non-traditional arenas. I am facilitating this workshop today as I also work with our traditional foundational program of assessing states and local governments and providing training. Now I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists. First, we have Mr. Otis J. Lattin, Sr., who is the Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for the City of Austin. Mr. Lattin started his public safety career as a firefighter in 1969 in Houston, Texas. He also became the first African American and the youngest person to attain the rank of Assistant Fire Chief in the Houston Fire Department. Mr. Lattin was hired as the Fire Chief of the District of Columbia Fire and Emergency Medical Services Department in 1993. He was the first fire chief appointed from outside the department in its 125-year history. In 1997, Mr. Lattin was hired as the Fire Chief Director of the City of Fort Lauderdale Fire Rescue and Building Department. He became the first African-American fire chief in the history of the City of Fort Lauderdale. Mr. Lattin served 3 city managers over his 8-year tenure as Fire Chief for the City of Fort Lauderdale. Mr. Lattin was hired in April 2006 as the Director of the Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for the City of Austin. Mr. Lattin completed studies at the University of Houston and earns a Bachelor of Science degree in Technology. He has also completed a 4-year Executive Fires Officer program at the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg. He has also completed studies at the John F. Kennedy School of Government for Senior Executives at Harvard University. And in May of 2000, he received his Master's of Business Administration from Florida Atlantic University. In addition, Mr. Lattin received the professional designation of a CFO from the Commission on Chief Fire Officer designation in 2003. In 2010, he achieved the designation of the Certified Emergency Manager from EMAP. And then finally, Mr. Lattin directed the City of Austin's EMAP baseline efforts and received initial EMAP accreditation in April 2012. Our next panelist is Mr. Kevin Penney, who is the Deputy Director of the Office of Emergency Management for the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, Nashville, Tennessee. Mr. Penney is a member of the Metro Nashville Office of Emergency Management since its creation in 1992. He is responsible for the day-to-day management of the office, operational readiness, enforcement of policies and procedures, and ensuring the office projects are in accordance with objectives. He is also the co-manager of the Metro's Emergency Operations Center and serves on the Mayor's Situation Management Team. Mr. Penney has written and trained officials on a multitude of emergency, contingency, hazard, and site-specific plans. In addition, Mr. Penney is project manager and lead advisor for the Nashville Area Urban Security Initiative and Tennessee Homeland Security District 5. Mr. Penney is a 1990 graduate of Middle Tennessee State University, where he earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in Criminal Justice Administration. He is also a member of the International Association of Emergency Managers and the State Capitals Organized for Protecting America. Mr. Penney is also an EMAP assessor and currently serves as the Office of Emergency Management's Accreditation Manager. He also spearheaded efforts in 2010 to allow for the EMAP self-assessment process of all 7 counties within the Nashville UASI and continues to oversee EMAP efforts for the Nashville office assessment in 2012. Our third panelist is Ms. Laurel Nelson, my apologies. She's the Deputy Director for the City of Seattle Office of Emergency Management. Ms. Nelson has been an emergency management professional for over 16 years with local experience at both city and county level. In March 2012, Ms. Nelson was appointed in the Deputy Director role with the City of Seattle Office of Emergency Management. She manages the vision set by the Director by providing the program oversight of 9 professional and 2 administrative staff, along with the day-to-day budget, grant, and personnel administration. Her career in emergency management started with the City of Kirkland Fire Department and then joining the King County Office of Emergency Management. Ms. Nelson also served as the emergency manager for the City of Bellevue Emergency Preparedness Division before joining the City of Seattle Office of Emergency Management in January 2007. She has been involved in 3 EOC transitions into newly built facilities involving design integration and requiring operational readiness. Ms. Nelson's activation experience in various incident command roles includes severe snow and wind, weather, flooding, landslides, earthquakes, World Trade Organization, Top Off, Y2K, 9/11, and the 10-year anniversary hazmat and urban interface fire events. As you can see, our panelists are experienced and professional subject matter experts. You can find more detailed information on the bio sheet provided in the materials. As a reminder, again, if you have any questions, please raise your hand on the dashboard. So now I'll provide information about EMAP to include our approach, benefits, and existing partnerships. Some of you may already be aware of who we are and what we do, but for those of you that do not, I'm just going to provide a brief background and status. In 1997, the National Emergency Management Association hosted a session during their mid-year conference on the need for standards and assessments within emergency management. The NEMA members collaborated to further advance the professionalism of the emergency management community, and the result was the creation of the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, or EMAP. In the beginning, we had many organizations that collaborated on and supported the development of EMAP, including, of course, NEMA, IME, the U.S. DHS, FEMA, DOJ, DOT, National Governors Association, National League of Cities, Council of State Governments, National Association of Counties, individual states, and many more. EMAP is an independent nonprofit organization and is the only voluntary assessment and accreditation process for federal, state, territorial, regional, tribal, and local emergency management programs. EMAP is governed by an independent commission that is appointed by both NEMA and IME and represents state, local, academic, and private sector emergency management organizations. EMAP is currently staffed with 4 employees. We train and maintain a volunteer cadre of over 300 assessors. The value of the EMAP process depends largely upon the work and credibility of the assessors that conduct the on-site assessments for the candidate programs. EMAP has been designed to facilitate determination of compliance with standards. Our backbone is agreed upon meaningful and scalable national standards called the Emergency Management Standard by EMAP, and it continues to evolve in partnership with our stakeholders, and it represents the best in emergency management. The standard is the criterion used to determine qualification for accreditation. EMAP established the first emergency management standard and received American National Standards, or ANSI, accreditation in 2007. EMAP facilitates the peer review assessment and accreditation process that provides a means for strategic improvement and fosters excellence and accountability in emergency management programs. All of the information that I have shared on this slide can be found in the Candidate's Guide to Accreditation and the Participant Manual and the EMAP standard. If there are no questions, then we will move on to address the EMAP approach. The Emergency Management Standard by EMAP establishes the minimum acceptable performance criteria for an emergency management program. The standard currently consists of 64 standards intended to indicate the components a quality emergency management program has in place. The standard describes what a program should accomplish, but not necessarily how compliance with the standard should be achieved. The standard is flexible so that programs of differing sizes, populations, risk, and resources can use it as a blueprint for improvement and can attain compliance with the standard. The approach that we use is to look at the candidate's entire program. That does not limit the assessment to just an emergency management agency, but every partner organization that has a role in emergency management. Some examples would be the Public Information Office, your public safety agencies such as police and fire, and then additional departments such as public health, transportation, and potentially agricultural extension offices. EMAP has taken great care to provide clarification on this specific issue, so I'd like to point you to the EMAP standards that were provided to you. On page 1, there is a specific definition for the emergency management program, and it actually clarifies that we look at the jurisdiction-wide system that provides for management and coordination of prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery activities for all hazards. The system that we look at encompasses all organizations, agencies, departments, and individuals having responsibilities for these activities. So now we'll move on and we'll talk about the EMAP assessment and accreditation process. The process builds on standards and assessment work by various organizations, adding requirements for documentation and verification that neither both the standards nor the self-assessment alone can provide. The process assesses strengths as well as areas of improvement. As with most professional accreditation programs, there are several phases in the process. The first phase is the self-assessment and documentation. The substance of the self-assessment is using the standard to evaluate whether the program meets each of the 64 standards and identifying documentation the program will offer to show that it meets compliance with each standard. The EMAP program assessment tool will help guide the program self-assessment. The second phase is the on-site assessment by a team of trained independent assessors. Most teams consist of up to 6 assessors who will analyze the documentation presented as proofs of compliance in relationship to the standard. The assessors will also conduct interviews and direct observations and record their findings in the assessment report. The on-site assessment is typically 5 days. The third phase is the assessment report. The report is provided to the candidate program, who then determines if they will seek accreditation. If they determine to seek accreditation, then the report is provided to the Program Review Committee for review and recommendation. The Program Review Committee decides by a majority vote to either recommend or not recommend accreditation. The recommendation is then provided to the EMAP Commission for consideration. The full Commission's deliberations culminate in a motion to award or deny accreditation. Again, the standard and the process information that I've talked about can be found in the Candidate's Guide to Accreditation and the EMAP standard. So I'm going to move on to the next slide to talk about EMAP benefits. If a program decides they will not seek accreditation, then they can use the process and the assessment report to benefit their program in the following ways. The candidate program can use the standards as the framework for a comprehensive emergency management program focus and identify components to constructively build and/or enhance their program. In addition, they can use it as a capabilities gap analysis. The assessment and the on-site assessment provides an opportunity for a practical, cost-effective approach to assess their emergency management capabilities. We've seen a great many programs use the EMAP self-assessment process to complete an introspective self-assessment that assists them in making management decisions and enhancements within fiscally constrained budgets. In addition, the process demonstrates discipline and accountability to the program's officials and the citizens by regularly reviewing, maintaining, and documenting compliance with the established standards and industry best practices. In addition, it also offers citizens evidence of their government's best efforts to comply with national standards. Some of the national benefits are that the EMAP process provides a common structure for review and analysis among state and local government programs nationwide. In addition, it allows for a holistic view of the nation's emergency management and preparedness network. EMAP also derives benefit through the assessment process as it provides a continual method by which we can assess the clarity and appropriate application of the standard and allows the EMAP Technical Committee real-world evidence when considering changes and additions to the standard. I just wanted to pause for just a second and make sure that we don't have any questions. Okay, if there are no further questions, then we'll move along to the EMAP partnerships. As strong as EMAP has grown to represent the best in emergency management, our partnerships are the bedrock of our success. EMAP is an affiliate member with the Council of State Governments. Through our affiliation with the Council of State Governments, we can share ideas and combine efforts to accomplish mutual goals. The affiliates such as ourselves contribute to for specialized expertise, information, resources, and issues to the overall mission of the Council of State Governments. In turn, CSG offers a mechanism by which affiliates may tap into CSG's products and services. Our partner with the Council of State Governments really enables us to bring EMAP to a broader collective state audience. EMAP has a long-standing partnership with NEMA. As I mentioned earlier, they were involved in our creation. NEMA is the professional association of and for emergency management directors from all 50 states, the 8 U.S. territories, and the District of Columbia. EMAP always attends their annual conference and provides EMAP sessions and trainings to those states, territories, and of course the District of Columbia. EMAP works comprehensively with the International Association of Emergency Managers. They sponsor EMAP training at their annual conferences and publishes EMAP articles in the IM Bulletin. And we will in fact be instructing a course at the upcoming IM conference. Our partnership with FEMA involves FEMA provides funding to maintain our EMI training and conduct state, urban area, and tribal baseline assessments. In addition, FEMA supports EMAP in their efforts, ongoing efforts, such as in 2010 they had their preparedness report to Congress, and one of the items for consideration underneath that was that to require the urban area regions to become EMAP compliant. And that would have meant that all 63 urban areas would have gone through the self-assessment and on-site process for a baseline. They also include the EMAP criterion in the National Plans Review. EMAP is also included in FEMA Region 9's National Preparedness Division 5-year strategic plan. And then FEMA also sponsors our EMAP training, as I mentioned earlier, our courses at EMI, which is the Assessor and Accreditation Manager training, the E-122. We have a course coming up in October. And then EMAP is also included in the FEMA Fundamentals of Emergency Management course. It's the IS-230, and they basically provide that EMAP is a very good way to build a comprehensive emergency management program. In addition, our partners NACO and ICMA are partnering sponsors, and we attend their annual conferences and provide EMAP sessions and trainings to city and county officials. Some of the other EMAP partnerships that we've built over the years include the United States Army Corps of Engineers. EMAP entered into a 2-year pilot that led to a 5-year program to integrate EMAP into their policies and doctrine that will basically assess all Army Corps of Engineer divisions and districts nationwide over the next 5 years. For the Center for Disaster and Humanitarian Assistance and the United States Africa Command, we have been engaged to conduct assessments on African nations. In turn, those nations use the assessment data to build and enhance their emergency management programs that develop into a strategic plan where they can use international funding sources from United States Africa Command, USAID, International Red Cross, the World Food Program. All those different agencies come together to help them or to provide them with funding to build their programs. We have an existing partnership with the Sydney Water Utility that is located in Australia. We will be sponsoring a training to assist, they will be sponsoring a training to assist us in building our Austrian assessor cadre. They will also be participating in a pilot in the upcoming year. Our partnership with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention is they are doing a federal baseline of their headquarters in Atlanta, and that will be taking place in 2013. Lastly, we currently have 41 accredited programs and over 300 programs with open subscriptions. Our partnerships are continuing to grow both nationally and internationally. As we've heard from a great many programs wanting to know how other programs have successfully used EMAP for basic program sustainment, we thought this would be a good opportunity to present to the audience or you as participants on a biannual basis. For today's presentation, we have panelists that are in separate phases of EMAP. One recently attained accreditation, one has completed the self-assessment and is planning on their on-site in the coming months, and one is working on their self-assessment and looking to schedule their on-site in late 2013, early 2014. In addition, each of these programs took innovative approaches to the EMAP process. Before we begin the panelist portion of the presentation, does anyone have any questions about the EMAP standard or process? If you do, if you will please just hit the raise your hand function. Okay, well, we don't have any questions at this time, so let's begin hearing from our first panelist, Mr. Otis J. Lanton, who I mentioned earlier is the Director of the City of Austin Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And hold on just one second, Otis, and I will unmute you. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Our office became fully accredited by the Emergency Management Accreditation Commission in April of this year. And we're very, very proud to become a member of this elite group of accredited jurisdictions. My presentation today will provide you with 4 things. First, an overview of the City of Austin and our Urban Area Security Initiative region. Secondly, why we decided to go through the accreditation process. Thirdly, provide a timeline of what happened, when it happened, and the cost for us to become accredited. And finally, I'd like to give you an insight on some challenges, some best practices, and our next steps. Next slide. The City of Austin is the first and only city in the state of Texas to become EMAP accredited. And we're the second fastest growing city in the nation. We are home to more than a dozen colleges, and the University of Texas is our largest university, and it's the 5th largest university. One thing that we're proud of is that we have about 19 million visitors each year to the area. That's more than Disneyland at about 15 million, the Eiffel Tower at about 7 million, and Niagara Falls at about 14 million. We are also headquarters to many major corporations. And recently, Apple has decided to come to our area. and we're in the process of Formula One. The Formula One racetrack is being built here in our area, and that's going to give us additional challenges. Next slide. Austin, Round Rock, and the Round Rock urban area became a UYC in 2008, but we lost our status in 2011. Our area includes the cities of Austin, Round Rock, and the counties of Travis, Williamson, and Hayes. And one of the things that we decided, even though we lost our status, that we were going to continue to work together as a UYC region. So we still call ourselves a UYC, even though we don't get the grant funding. The city of Austin serves as the federal and the state point of contact for this UYC area. And this area covers about 1.6 million people. During this period of time, we have been able to get about $7.6 million in grant funding that we've been able to use to cover some of our gaps and to improve our overall ability to be able to meet our challenges from a terrorist perspective and from a natural hazard perspective. Next slide. Next slide. We chose to go through the accreditation process because of two major things. One, to assess and evaluate our emergency management program against national best practices and standards. And secondly, to identify our strengths and areas that need improvement. Simply put, we wanted to improve and to get better at what we do. Our accreditation process took about 19 months from start to finish. But this can be reduced if you want to. We had a longer period of time, and we'll go through this timeline in a few minutes. These next slides will go through the timeline to show some of the things that we did. Next slide. The first critical step, starting out in September 2010, after we made the decision to take this journey, and it is a journey, the first thing we had to do was to get buy-in from our city leaders. I also had to get buy-in from my staff and our partner agencies, but because you have to have all of those folks on board to be able to get this done. We also had to identify a funding source. And then there became, after we identified the funding source, we had to hire an accreditation manager. And on this slide, you're looking at one of the most important persons that we had in this whole process. That's Belinda Harris. She's our accreditation manager. You must have someone that is dedicated and committed to this process. That's a must. Belinda attended the EMAP accreditation manager and the assessor training. And you need to be able to do both of these in order to have the information and knowledge that you need to be able to get through this process. So those are highly recommended courses that you should take if you want to go through this process. She served as our single point of contact, and she communicated on a regular basis with the EMAP staff, because you have to have that inner relationship and someone with a single point of contact to work with EMAP in order to get clarifications on things that you need, so that you won't go down the wrong path when you're going through these standards. She identified key contributors within our office that needed to assist and with the documentation, gathering the documentation, policies, procedures, and she assigned out who would be the point of contact for within our office and within the offices of our partners. Next slide. Next slide. Belinda also developed a work plan. In December 2010, Belinda finalized a work plan, and she created and established a system where she could capture and organize any pertinent documentation, including providing folders on our shared computer drive, so that all of the documentation that was being gathered could be put in one place. One thing that we found was that we had a lot of the documentation, but we had it all over the place. We had committees, and we had sign-in sheets, but it was not all in one place. And that's a very important thing to remember, that you need to gather and put all of this stuff in one place so that you can get your hands on it. So she suggested how to organize the documentation and how we would need to develop the system to be able to put all this information in one place. We really, Belinda emphasized the need for us to be able to write our documents and our policies and procedures in language that is easily understood by all. Sometimes we don't look at it. Belinda was not an emergency manager, so when she was looking at this stuff, she could see how we needed to develop it in more simple language. And that helped a lot. Next slide. In March of 2011, the accreditation manager and our HSEM assistant director attended the EMAP accreditation manager and assessor training. Those were two of the trainings that I told you is very important for your people that's going to be involved with accreditation to go through. And both of them was held the same week in Emmitsburg, Maryland at the National Emergency Management Institute. They learned the importance of breaking down each one of the elements of the EMAP standards into what they call between the commas. And that's a very important thing that you'll learn as you go through the process, because everything in a standard between those commas means something. And you have to document all of that stuff in order to be able to meet that standard. Next slide. Next slide. Beginning in March of 2011, until December 2011, we were documenting and gathering documentation for everything we did. Documentation, documentation. That's something that is very, very important when you're going through an accreditation process. We learned that interpreting the language of each standard and what our documentation complied with the language of each standard was a challenge. In several cases, we found that our program did comply with the standard, but the document that we had might not have said exactly what the standard said. So we had to be able to look at it and make sure that we understood the standard so that we could show that these documents did fit that standard. My advice, before submitting any documentation, you should allow your accreditation manager and your program staff to examine those documents in detail. Because if a document mentions or references a plan, a law, or policy, you have to be prepared to present that law, plan, or policy to the assessors. Next slide. On January the 23rd through the 27th of this year, we had our on-site assessors came to Austin to do their evaluation. And once they went through all of the evaluations, they were a very good team, a very helpful team. they identified areas that needed improvement or where we were not compliant. And once they shared that information with us, they would share information with us each day. And they also, at the end of the whole process, they shared the information with us about every standard that we were not compliant with. And this really helped us to identify those things that was important for us to be able to correct. Next slide. On January 27th, 2012, the last day of the assessor's on-site visit, the assessors presented to me and my staff 9 standards that we were found non-compliant in. And they told us that we would have approximately 7.5 weeks that we could submit that information, additional information on those standards if we would like to. We decided as a staff that we were going to look at all of those particular things that were non-compliant and submit the appropriate information within those 7.5 weeks, and we did. So finally, on March the 7th, 2012, we submitted supplemental documentation showing how we had corrected those 9 areas. And then the assessors had to review that and make sure that we did give the appropriate information back to them. So we were very, very proud to be able to get that information done and get it back in so that they would be able to say that we did meet those particular standards. Next slide. As a result of us being able to submit that information, we were told that we would be able to come to Lexington, Kentucky on April the 10th, 2012 and present to the commission. So myself, one of my assistant directors, Linda McGinnis, and Belinda Hare, our accreditation manager, went to Lexington, and I was able to present to the committee our program, an overview of Austin, the things that we had done to become accredited, and give them a little bit of information about some of the challenges that we had going through the process. And they were very happy to hear from us about the process that we had gone through. Next slide. On April 13, 2012, we were notified that we were approved for full EMAP accreditation. That was a very proud day. We were happy. A lot of hard work had gone into it during these 19 months, and we were proud to meet these requirements. The accreditation process provided us an opportunity to strengthen our relationships with our partner agencies and to strengthen teamwork by providing an opportunity for collaboration and working together as a common unit within our office and our partners outside of our office. Accreditation also provided us an opportunity to learn more about each partner's role and responsibility in our emergency management program. And accreditation also served as a motivational tool for our office and our partner agencies. Because one of the processes that we had to go through in order to become accredited, every department within our city had to get a continuity of operations plan developed and approved. Some departments had them, some departments had partials, but we had to come up and set up a process where we ended up with all of those particular processes done within 1 year, and we did it, and we were very proud to get 42 departments in our city to have COOP plans prepared and exercised in order to be able to meet accreditation. Next slide. Now this is kind of a cost slide that we put in to show what it cost us for this accreditation process. And it cost us approximately about $49,000. However, the largest amount of that cost was in a salary, at $41,200 for a salary for our accreditation manager for about 16 months. Now, if you don't have an accreditation manager that's going to be outside of your organization, you won't have that cost. If you're designating someone within your own organization. But we needed to be able to do that to make our process work. Additionally, if you see, we sent our assessors to week-long assessment training up at Emmitsburg, but that didn't cost us anything other than the meals. It was about $400 for meals for that period of time for 2 staff members. We also had to pay for our EMAP application fee, about $4,900 for that. And we traveled to Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, and I took myself and 2 others, so it cost us about $2,700. So we were just showing all of the costs. A lot of that cost can be taken out. It's not, everybody don't have to use all of that particular cost. Next slide. Some best practices, and we were proud of this. The EMAP assessors identified for saying that we had at least 4 best practices. One was our city and Travis County shared EOC. We have a shared EOC in this area where the county and the city staff the offices and the EOC, and we work jointly together in that EOC. If it's a city-centric event, then I'm the EOC director and the county assists me. If it's a county-centric event, then the county manages the EOC and me and my staff assist them. So that was one best practice. Second was after-action reviews, correction action plan, and development process. They saw that as a best practice. Our regional interoperable communications plan was a best practice. And we had an opportunity to do a partial activation of our EOC during the time the assessors was here, and they liked the system that we had, that we went through. Next slide. Moving forward, we plan to sustain our accreditation via our operations budget because we don't have grant funding anymore. So we need to get this tied into our regular budget process, and that's what we're working on. Accreditation is now part of everything that we do. All of these systems that we put in place, all of the documentation, making sure that we have folders to put information about meetings and sign-in sheets and all that stuff, we do that on a daily basis. And we also have told our region that we will consult with anybody in our region that want to become accredited. We will assist them in the process to become accredited. Next slide. Okay, and that's the end of my presentation. Do we have any questions?
And I'm holding right now to make sure that we don't have any questions. And it doesn't look like we do. So thank you, Mr. Lattin, for sharing your process with us today. Again, I just want to stress that this is, each one of the different panelists will provide you with a different view or different process that they have used to get either to accreditation or working through the self-assessment and the on-site assessment. And we are so very proud that the City of Austin achieved accreditation. And again, the second largest city in the state of Texas. They were the first city accredited in the state of Texas. So it being the capital, we're very proud of that. So at the next thing, we will go on and move on to Mr. Kevin Penney, who's the Deputy Director for the Metropolitan Government of Nashville, Davidson County, Tennessee. And again, Mr. Penney was having technical difficulties earlier, but I need to unmute everybody so that Mr. Penney can provide his presentation. So if you could please mute the phone on your end, so then that way the only person that we can hear is Mr. Penney. Kevin, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Go ahead, sir. We're on the main page of your presentation, which is the city's pictures of the city with the Metropolitan Government of Nashville, Davidson County, Tennessee. Do you want me to switch to the next slide, sir?
That's fine. Thank you. This slide is basically the composite of the Homeland Security districts in the state of Tennessee. Greater Nashville is Homeland Security District 5. There's basically two different components. Originally, for Homeland Security in Tennessee, there were 11 Homeland Security districts with basically a hub city that was a larger city, more resources and capabilities, being able to basically guide and lead smaller communities that were within that Homeland Security district. That all began right after 9/11, and between 08 and 10, we were added as a Tier 2 UASI. And of course, with the budget cuts in 2011, Nashville, along with a lot of other Tier 2s, got dropped off, and then we got picked back up again through the Homeland Security Grant Program. And but we are happy to say that during our investment justification phase, I believe it was 09, that we did say that as a major component in the data sharing and communications IJ, that accreditation was most important to us. And we were able to submit that application and get approved. We got the buy-in from all 7 counties to submit that as a budgetary item in that year's UASI grant application, and ultimately got approved. We set forth an 18-month timeline between when we got the executed contract and the monies allocated to spend and the end of the grant period. Of course, like I said, the IJ was approved on delivery, and $230,000 total for 7 counties was allocated through DHS and the state. Nashville being the larger city with a more complex accreditation process and just a lot more from resources to coup planning and everything else, just the population base alone made a big difference. We just required more funds to be able to tackle that project. So we budgeted $120,000 to do that, and the thought was originally, and the next slide is a duplicate, so Christy, you can skip to the next one on approach, where we developed the RFP, and that's a request for proposal through our purchasing department. We had very narrow requirements. We had a lot of deliverables, a lot of tight timelines and schedules for the potential awarded bidder to meet. There were required numbers of meetings on a weekly and monthly basis during that whole project timeline that were required, as well as status reports. And I'll go ahead and pause right here and say that whenever a contractor is brought into a performance-based project like this, one of the things we highly recommend is to have these deliverables built in, not just into the scope of services, but also on the payment schedule, so that they know unless certain things are delivered on time and per the scope, they will not get paid for that quarter of the, or for that phase of the project. So with all that said, we had a pre-bid meeting with actually 3 of the interested vendors that read the business opportunity bulletin, and one of the 3 was awarded the contract. The other jurisdictions within our UASI, the other 6 counties, what they did was what we call piggybacking on our contract, but they used their allotment of funds, which was $30,000 each. That way they didn't have to redo contracts and go through that whole process. They could simply use the language and the scope of services in Nashville. Next slide, please. The project terms. Each jurisdiction contracted directly with the vendor for the services. By contract, I mean they were basically their own agent directly with the vendor, and using our contract terms in the similar phases and deliverables, they would then be required to ensure that deliverables were met and whatever schedule they decided to go on before the expiration of the grant period was totally up to the jurisdiction. The vendor, of course, was responsible for leading the project. That's what they were getting paid for. They were tapping into their expertise and their time and personnel resources to get the project going and keep it going. And again, I go back to those regular progress reports that we thought were vitally important. Next slide, please. The status now, ultimately we had 3 of the 7 counties that paid the vendor their allotment. And they've had varying degrees of success with the vendor approach. 4 months into the contract, we switched from the contractor to a full-time employee to manage the accreditation program. We realized that having a contractor who was from out of town, way out of town, and that just the travel constraints and the logistics, it just cannot compare to somebody who is on site. And I think Otis can certainly attest to this. Having a full-time person on site who's paid and dedicated to this project alone for a period of time is invaluable, and that's just something the contractor, in hindsight, couldn't provide to us. On the road to accreditation, next slide, please. With the accreditation manager, of course, we had dedicated workspace for this employee. We went through a temporary agency that's contracted through our local government that was already approved for this type of work, and we would hire someone based on criteria that we provided to them that was heavy on management skills and various other writing skills, planning, research, analysis, and other things that we thought would be valuable to the process, and that we would provide the expertise emergency management-wise and the tasks and deliverables to them. We tried someone out for about a month, and it was a trial basis, and decided to switch from that person to someone who previously worked here as a operations officer, and he's done extremely well. He's been at this since January. He meets regularly with the program staff and local agencies and gathers documentation on everything. Of course, I oversee all the activities, and Jeff Starr, who's now our accreditation manager, is the one that pretty much is leading this whole initiative, and he's our go-between, not just for our office and other agencies, but also EMAP. He provides me weekly updates. The next slide, please. Priority number one, we think is just all about communication. Is having full, for this accreditation manager, it's very important for them to have full access to all of the planning and trading folders, exercises, after action reports, anything that requires a document, any standard that requires a document, that they either have electronic access to it or paper access to it that can be made available during the on-site assessment. Again, going back to communication, it's a lot of it we've depended on outreach to the state and local governments for their input and opinions on what's worked best for them. And again, maintaining the records as we go through each of these standards and basically being our own self-assessors during the whole process and checking off those standards and saying, do we think logically the documentation that we have based on the standard and other cities in the state, if we think that'll meet muster, we believe that down the road that's going to make things more beneficial for us and get us to where we need to be. The current challenges is probably pretty common for assessment candidates. Being an assessor myself for EMAP, I think I've done probably 5 or 6 since 2003. We've encountered some of the same challenges on the standards that I actually saw as an assessor, so it wasn't a big surprise. And it's COOP planning. It's not just for the agency. It is for the affected agencies and local government that need to be able to operate if they're affected by the disaster itself. And that means not just their critical services, but government itself. So being able to demonstrate those planning capabilities and execute those through ordinances and plans is probably in a lot of cases going to be the biggest project that would need to be started by scratch. We were fortunate 10 years ago, this was an item that was identified by independent research report as being an operational gap in local government, and we got a head start on that whole initiative with a lot of executive level support. So to a certain degree, that's been a matter of making sure those plans are updated and communicated with the planning managers on anything that needs to be changed. Resource management, I think, is another bear for accreditation. There's a lot of logistics involved. It's an inventory. It's tracking. It's reaching out to every department that has a valuable resource that's needed in a disaster. It's how to get it, how much they have, where it is, and it's just a huge undertaking. Like Otis was saying earlier, this is another one of those standards where the information's out there, but how do you bring it all together and how do you get it to meet the standard so that it's understandable? Next slide, please. Of course, the benefits. One of the big things that I've seen as an assessor, and then we've seen during the assessment process ourselves, is to see where we're short on the various phases in the program. It could mean that even though we went through a historic flood 2 years ago, we need to finish up our mitigation plan. There's a lot of things that occurred during that historic flood that have changed our strategic actions in the plan. Various maps, of course, have changed a lot, whether it's a sinkhole or a flooded area. And of course, there's home buyouts that have occurred, upwards of 300 that need to be addressed in the plan. Not to mention that the vulnerability assessment needs to be adjusted. It also, as a benefit, it really demonstrates for the agency a high level of expertise and competency and capability. And that means not just to the public and elected officials, the media, other agencies, the state and federal government, but ourselves, because it's a source of pride, and I heard that word used several times by Otis. That's something that we're achieving, and we'll be able to point to and say we did it. It's kind of like a marathon, and we look forward to the finish line. The other benefit, of course, is it's going to justify the office in future budgets. We're all encountering, I'm sure to certain degrees, budgetary concerns where it's tough to get an increase in budget, much less hold on to what we've got. So we're able to demonstrate that we've got our act together, and we're giving the city a lot of value for the dollar, and there's a big investment being made, and we're showing that there's a big return on that investment through the staff and the experience and the plans and the exercises and everything else, and achieving something that's rare and hard to do. It's a big benefit. So you know, in closing, we're looking forward to it. We're scheduled for the actual on-site assessment in September, and so we're in the probably in the red zone on the 20-yard line, and looking forward to the final phase. And it's been a real good experience so far. Are there any questions?
Kevin, this is Christine. I don't see any questions right now. I just want to give everybody just a second. And again, if you have questions, then you can hit the button to raise your hand on under the attendee list. Okay.
That finishes my presentation, Christine.
I have a second.
Yeah, Christine, can you hear me?
We can. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I believe the logistics issue was brought up, and just a point of curiosity, how is that being handled as far as documentation of, you know, logistics management, accessibility to resource, any of that stuff?
Is that
I'm sorry, that was a question for the last presenter?
Yeah, sorry. We've got a couple of different approaches on resource management. The first being, and we think it's a practical approach, matching the resources with our hazard vulnerability assessment. In other words, if we say that flooding is a medium probability but a high risk, then what are the resources that we need to address that critical need? It could be bulldozers, it could be sandbags, it could be volunteers. So basically matching the hazard with the resources, we think is a good approach, and we don't get pigeonholed into actually departmentally. It's more what is the need and what is needed. I mean, what is the hazard and what resource needs to be available to address that hazard. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Christine, this is Laurel. Are you ready for my piece?
I'm muted.
Are you ready for my piece?
Laurel, are you still with us?
I'm still here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now.
Yay.
You can go ahead and start, ma'am.
Great, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to transition from the beautiful heartland of the United States out here to the Pacific Northwest. Let me just go ahead to the next slide, Christine. I'm going to peruse through these pretty quickly, but I want to just establish kind of where we're at here in Washington State, specifically Seattle. So Washington State does have 9 Homeland Security regions, as you see there. There are actually 39 counties in the state of Washington. Click again, Christine. For us, we're in actually Region 6, so we are within King County. King County is over 1.9 million people, and we actually are a UASI community. We were originally one of the original communities in UASI back in 2004, and UASI has actually expanded not only to the city of Seattle, but it includes King County, our partners to the north in Snohomish County, and our partners to the south in Pierce County. The total population in that area is 3.4. You get some details there. We are the 15th largest metropolitan area, as well as we have a pretty significant ferry system here. In addition to, next transition, Christine, is we're also a regional catastrophic area. So that also has a much bigger footprint beyond the UASI community, and that particular population area is 4.2. Next slide. Some details on City of Seattle. We're over 600,000 for population, and some details there on workday population, and we've got over 750,000. There's 3 major universities in our community. We have 19 hospitals, and they all are within the City of Seattle here, of course. We're a pretty large city with a number of departments. We do have actually our own city power here, so City Light operates our utilities for electrical and serves not only the population for the City of Seattle, but we also serve a couple of the jurisdictions to the north and the south of us. In addition to that, just to share with you, they also run 4 dams that are outside of the jurisdictional boundaries of the City of Seattle. So we've got one up in the northeast part of Washington State and also one up in the north central part of the state. Next slide. So I think you've heard from my other 2 comrades here, you know, we truly believe, as all of you who are listening in on the conference call here in this webinar, is we truly believe in professionalism. And this is a great way, as you heard from Otis talking about documentation, filling those gaps, you're creating that team camaraderie. Our staff, as we are transitioning into moving forward with EMAP, they're jazzed, they're interested in seeing where we have our gaps and how we can work with one another and work with our partners, not only in our city departments, but the agencies that help make up our bigger P of our big planning P, or program P. Next slide. So we're a twinkle in the eye at one point, so a transition there, Christine. There, back in 2009, there were 2 of us on staff that were trained assessors and had gone out to numerous deployments. In 2010, we had an additional 3 staff get trained up and go out on assessments. I'll echo Kevin's comments about it is so interesting and insightful to be an assessor and actually see what other professionals are doing, and it kind of really helps you focus in on what you need to do for your own program. In addition, last year, our director, Barb Graff, started informing our chief and our mayor and some key council members that we were interested in pursuing EMAP, as well as our director, you'll see at the top there. She does serve on the EMAP commission and is involved in a number of those committees. So we went from a twinkle to the eye to a crawling stage here, so transition there, Christine. So starting this year, I use the term soft sell there. So we're basically not waiting the standards in front of anyone. We're really utilizing opportunities to say, hey, we've got these meetings. Let's keep better track of the agendas, the meeting notes. Let's create those electronic files and have more stability and documentation. In addition to, we're starting to roll out and have rolled out the EMAP standards to our staff. So At staff meetings, we've been pulling out the standards and talking through different pieces. We're going to start enveloping those into our strategic plan. So for instance, tomorrow we're actually having our office strategic retreat, and we're looking at how we can start incorporating EMAP successfully into our work plan for 2013. And then at the end of this year, we're going to start that gap analysis, and we're looking at ways on how we can do that internally with our staff as well as working with our partners. Next slide. So we're now at, hope to go into the walking stage there, so transition there. The first part of next year, we're going to start creating that process and the reporting cycle. I think another big piece that you heard my two other cohorts talk about was documentation and just setting up those filing systems, be it hard copies and electronic copies. We have a group that we meet with on a weekly basis. It's made up of our operational departments, our strategic work group. We call them our SWIG, SWG. As well as we have a monthly group called our Disaster Management Committee, and they are made up of not only core city departments, but they're also representative of agencies and partners, colleges, universities, businesses, etc. So we're continuing that transition and interaction and collaboration with our stakeholders. And hopefully by the end of 2013, next transition there, Christine, we'll be running up to our finish line, which will then be getting things all finalized, getting them populated into the assessment tool, getting geared up to have an assessment team on site, and then hopefully successfully go through that process of review and getting accredited. Next slide. We signed up for the free EMAP assessment tool, and everything that we're doing and have done since we did that, and I think that's been a year ago that we signed up for that, we have that EMAP lens on. So we're looking at, again, how are we convening stakeholders, how are we looking at integrating all the stakeholders within our planning processes, within our educational processes, looking at our hazard identification, making sure that we have fully implemented the consequences pieces of that. And for those of you that are involved in THIRA, you're probably looking at that in your own programs and jurisdictions as well. Again, we're incorporating into our strategic plan, again, with that goal of 2014. Next slide. I think you've heard this from both Otis and Kevin. I'll just reiterate. It is a morale booster, and I think it will even be more of a morale booster for our folks here. And again, it's not only the small P for the Office of Emergency Management, but it's the bigger P, the program overall, where we've got those emergency management coordinators out in our various departments and looking how we can collaboratively work together. Next slide. I think Kevin already touched upon this, but it really is about our team members here, and these are kind of a snapshot of some of our team members that we have here in the Office of Emergency Management, and looking at how we can engage everyone, all those stakeholders. Kevin talked about communication and keeping those open communications established, and just continuing to work collaboratively, not only with the stakeholders within the city departments and agencies, but also looking at how we can engage our community members. And we've got a lot of public education outreach efforts that do actively engage the community. Next slide. It helps us sustain. So Kevin talked about the ability to sustain our own programs. I think we're all facing those budget constraints, and we're not, we're not at dealing with the same kind of challenges where we're having a $32 million gap in our own city budget. So it also, I think, looks at attrition. So some of you possibly are in programs or took on programs where documentation wasn't all that great. You know, people are really smart and they have a lot of things in their heads, but when it comes to actually meeting the standards and meeting that attrition, when there's a number of us that are going to start retiring at that age level, we need to start looking at documentation that reflects not only what our program does, but how people beyond us are going to be able to continue to move forward, as well as it's going to help us save some of our program elements during those tough budget times. Next slide. For us, we're on the point of looking at how we might want to proceed. Our partners to the south of us, Pierce County Emergency Management, their deputy director down there was their accreditation manager. We're looking at some pretty talented people in office that we could possibly shift their workloads so that they can dedicate their time to assisting with the accreditation manager responsibilities. We've got a very seasoned emergency manager in our office working under catastrophic planning that we're considering possibly hiring her for part-time position to help facilitate and fill that role as the accreditation manager. Next slide. I think in the end, not only are we pursuing, but I think it's all about sharing the professionalism with other jurisdictions. So some of you might be familiar with Dennis Milletti and the whole concept that when you take a piece of information, you put it out there and people start talking with one another, and it's that whole milling aspect. That's what we've been doing in our local area here as well as in the jurisdictions throughout Washington State. Is we're talking with other partners, we're talking with other emergency management programs, we're sharing. I think the beauty of emergency management is why reinvent the wheel when you can talk with others, and it's a very open profession that's willing to share with one another. In addition, Barb Graff, our director, also serves at the big cities emergency managers level. So we're also milling that with other jurisdictions. New York City, Boston, I think we'll be going through sometime in the future. So there's these opportunities to be able to enhance and even further develop our program and develop the profession of emergency management. I think that's it, Christine.
Okay, and I wanted to give everybody just an opportunity to ask or take the time to ask a question. Just if you could please again use the raise your hand function. Mr. Plummer, hold on just 1 second and I will unmute you. Are you there, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I guess my question will be in general. We're Orange County, of course, we're going for recreditation. And it's due in 2014. Now, next year, I've already signed up. We have a date for July 2013 to begin the review, to have our assessors in. So we're in the process of doing everything we need to do to get ready for that, go through our self-assessment. So I got several questions, but one I want to ask is, when should I submit my application? Because I got to send it to my board to get approved and signed. But how many months out? I'm basically this month, I'm a year out. So what time frame should it be in by October? Should it be in by December?
Mr. Plummer, are you referring to your application for assessment or your application for reaccreditation?
Well, I guess it's for assessment / accreditation.
You can send them in now.
Okay, so
or just whenever you get all the signatures, and just whenever you get everything taken care of on it, just let us know then. If you've already gotten your time frame set aside for 2013.
Yeah, we've arranged that so we can make sure we can get on the books.
Okay, yeah, just whenever you get a chance to send that in after it's been signed and everything, that'd be great.
Okay, so that'd be within a month, 2 months, no more than. Okay, the other question I had is, in filling out my application, the only stumbling block is the question 16. Previously, there was nothing in there from 2005, and I'm thinking I don't like sending in blanks or something that says none. So it states about the unusual or notable features or aspects of your program. What type of information are you looking for in there?
I think it goes back to some of those demographic information that you saw each one of these programs providing, as far as, you know, you have a campus in your county that you work with on a regular basis that has hazardous materials. Do you have multiple chemical plants? Anything that would stand out like that, that's something that we would want for you to include on that, so that we know going into it to share that information with the assessors. And then they're also aware of the fact that you have some specific little intricacies that need to be considered.
Okay, all right, got that. And on the last presentation, I noticed that Ms. Nelson, had information about free assessment tools. Is that available to us still? And then she had on there about the, what was that? Yeah, that was one more. Oh, the EMAP lens. I didn't catch the EMAP lens. So those two things.
So Ron, this is Laurel Nelson with Seattle. The EMAP lens is really just everything that you look at your program and what you're doing day to day. It's through that lens of having the standards always in front of you or always in mind, that as you start working towards creating a work group, are you getting the right representatives there? Are you documenting that you actually had these types of meetings? You've had the notes taken care of. Your planning process, have you documented all of your planning process and who's been involved in that from the get-go? And it's just really always having that in your forefront of what are those EMAP standards and how am I pursuing the elements of our program in relation to those standards.
Okay, I follow. Okay, because we're using a spreadsheet to do similar, but it's just the terminology that you're using it.
Yeah, a little analogy.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the presentation.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any further questions, so I wanted to thank you, Laurel, for sharing your process with us and kind of how you guys are looking at this differently, and then also providing that long-term plan or strategic plan on how you're moving forward with this process before we continue to move on. I think I just want to spend a few more minutes, and I know it's kind of late for some of you on the East Coast, but I just wanted to highlight just a couple of things. Before we conclude the presentation, I really wanted to share some general resources EMAP provides to our subscribers. And one of those is one of the things that Mr. Otis Lattin mentioned earlier from the City of Austin when he referred to their best practices. We do have a best practice program that was created so that you could access other emergency management programs that were involved in the EMAP assessment and accreditation process. That will give you the ability to share information and promote and use those practices and documents found to be of benefit, within the emergency preparedness department. We have a lot of programs that take advantage of this, so that's one of our most successful programs and resources that we have. In addition, EMAP is always continually crosswalking our standards with that of other standard developing organizations such as NFPA 1600. You've got the HICS system, the Hospital Incident Command System, also the Joint Commission, which is JACO, and then we also crosswalk with the ISO standards, especially 31000, which is risk management, and then also working with the Canadian Standards Association on their Zeta 1600 standard as well. And of course, because our partnership is with FEMA and DHS, we always walk our crosswalk our standards with whatever guidance or requirements is released, whether it be grant guidance or program guidance or training. We most recently completed a crosswalk between our standards and the transitioned core capabilities list, which was the target capabilities list. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, being involved in the national plan review aspects as well. And then, of course, we always crosswalk with the National Incident Management System, or NIMS. Some of the other aspects, and one of the other aspects that I think is pretty important, and you heard each one of the programs talk specifically about how they funded or what strategy they used. The EMAP expenses are eligible as grant-funded projects under the fiscal year 2012, EMPG, State Homeland, and UOSI. Now, for EMPG, it is really literally up to your state because it's passed through the state. But we also expect for that trend to continue in the fiscal year 2013 for the EMPG, and then of course everybody's aware that they're transitioning all of the grants into the National Preparedness Grant Program, the NPGP. So don't feel like you're kind of out there on your own and that you can't use some type of existing funding if you're already getting it. You can submit a project through your state homeland, your UOSI, or the NPGP to basically move towards doing the EMAP baseline assessment and potentially moving towards EMAP accreditation. So in closing, we were just really hoping to provide you with our program's best practices. Some of these programs have been highly involved with us, and we felt like showing you the different programs and the different phases of working towards the EMAP accreditation would be beneficial. It would also provide you with more information about the EMAP process and the standards. Here's the contact information for today's panelists. Feel free to reach out to them. And then also myself, my contact is at the bottom of the page. And Mr. Plummer, if you're working towards on your paperwork or anything like that, you can feel free to give me a call or use my email address there at the bottom. But also understand that you can call our main line, Mr. Plummer, and that number is area code 859-244-8222. And they'll be able to assist you with your documentation for your upcoming reaccreditation effort. I also wanted to share just really quickly that we have upcoming training that will be held at EMI in October, and then we'll also have upcoming training for Assessor and Accreditation Manager at IME in November. And then we also have monthly webinars just very similar to this venue that we hold on specific standards, and I believe the one for this month will be 4.9, which is resource management. So if you're interested in EMAP or have any further questions, please feel free to contact us. And it doesn't look like we have any further questions. So I wanted to thank our panelists for their time today, and I also wanted to thank our participants for your time as well today. Since there are no further questions, then we'll go on and conclude the presentation. Thank you again for attending, and everybody have a very good Friday and resulting weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, panel, and thank you, Christine.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.